everyone, good evening. You're watching The Money Show on ET. Now, we just had an in-depth discussion on the expectations on the tax front with Deloitte, and now we'll talk about what this budget could do to your mutual fund portfolio, or what any of the budgets do to your mutual fund portfolio. Should you be worried? Should you rejig? Should you tweak your strategy? Well, we'll talk about all that and more with Mr. Anil Rego of Right Horizons. Mr. Rego, thank you so much for joining us on The Money Show. You know, with all of us sitting with our funds, with our portfolio, which may be set for different goals, maybe for retirement, for a child's education, etc., etc. Do these annual union budgets matter? I mean, how does a union budget essentially impact mutual funds and, you know, a portfolio?
See, normally an event like a budget is important for the markets, and such events end up, you see large market moves both on the downside and on the upside. So events like the budget are definitely important. The budget especially because it gives you a perspective of the economy, where it is. It gives you a perspective of what the government is thinking and what it is doing in terms of fiscal deficits, etc. And various policies that may impact both corporates as well as individual investors, who are investing into mutual funds, markets, etc. So budget is definitely important, and it's keenly watched, possibly the most important event for the markets during the financial year. So what does one do in such times? Now, one keeps in mind that events like this also, there's a little bit more hype around it, there are expectations, etc. You'll typically see maybe pre-budget rally and then it comes off later, or vice versa, unless it's something which is really heartwarming for markets. And normally it's not so easy because the finance minister is always having a bit of a juggling act between giving freebies to all of us and ensuring that the economy is in good shape and we are not seeing fiscal deficits, etc., worsen, which also then creates concerns for other financial investors. So that is important thing. What should an investor do in such a situation? I think beyond a point, if you are looking for planning for various needs, your retirement, etc., it may not make too much of a difference. So I would think just stay put. This time definitely there is some bit of expectation around the markets, around capital gains, especially. I think there's been some items, rumors around long-term capital gains becoming zero for equities. Okay, so there is some bit of I think push and pull around even debt funds. Can it become 2 years instead of 3 years? So there are expectations, and I think possibly markets would react positively to it. And if something like that comes out, of course, the issue that you have with expectations is that once you have expectations, it is not fulfilled, then you may just with nothing changing as well, you may see downturns and you may see markets fall and correct. So that's the thing to be cautious about.
So basically on the budget day, yes, you see really wild swings, come by in the markets. There's a lot of volatility. But when it comes to a mutual fund, essentially, as we know, it's for long-term investing, right? I mean, when you have an SIP, you invest maybe at the 1st of every month, at the 5th, at the 10th of every month. So whatever the volatility there is, your mutual fund and your SIP usually absorb it and even it out over that time period. So then, Mr. Rego, should I really be worrying so much about this 1, 2, 5-day volatility that you may see either in the run-up to the budget or post that from an equity mutual fund standpoint?
See, if you're a disciplined investor, then you actually don't have to be bothered too much about it, because what we suggest to investors as well, if you're doing your SIP and you're making your phased investments, you are looking at your asset allocation, ensuring your asset allocation is within those limits. Then I think there's nothing much to bother and you leave it aside. But it could happen that announcements which change the structure of things. So maybe post the budget, it would be good to just do a review, and because sometimes you may find that taxation changes, right? So if growth versus dividend, for example, just to give you an example, there's some change in taxation and one becomes favorable versus the other becomes unfavorable. You may need to tweak around, how you invest so that, you're taking maximum advantage of the taxation.
All right. Well, that's on the equity mutual fund bit. But I suppose, Mr. Rego, when it comes to debt mutual funds, and we have seen this in the past as well, there have been really wild swings on the NAV when yields have moved the needle. Now, as opposed to, your equity mutual funds, debt mutual fund holders are still relatively short-term holders and short-term investors in the market. So maybe, and especially liquid funds, right? I think if you do invest your money in a liquid fund, maybe you should perhaps keep your eye out on how that yield needle is moving. So should perhaps those guys who are investing in the fixed income side pay a little more close attention to the union budget?
Actually, the budget has a lot more for, the debt funds and the fixed income markets, because items like the fiscal deficit, how much the government is borrowing, etc., have long-term implications. And many times a small change can, have a drastic impact on the debt mutual fund side. And I think, see, for a liquid or a ultra short term, a very short term fund, it may not make as much of difference, but I think there will be larger impacts to where, schemes where the duration is slightly higher. And I think a lot of us would also look at longer term investing in mutual funds. And even if it's short term funds or medium term funds, I think those could have a larger impact. So those are things to watch out for. And where the signals are not too great, then, investors in higher duration products may just need to look at and review their portfolio strategy, because I think the budget can, in the case of debt funds, have a much, much larger impact.
So, Mr. Rego, then, we've got a week to go for the budget. Next week, we'll have 5 working days. In these 5 working days, based on what we've discussed for both equity mutual funds and debt mutual funds, do you recommend that investors take any steps to rejig their portfolio, to perhaps increase or decrease exposure to certain elements of their portfolio?
Actually, taking steps in advance, I think has no basis, right? Because you may just expect something quite a lot and it just doesn't happen, right? So I don't think it's a good idea to take steps on, your portfolio before the budget. If at all, the only thing is maybe from an equity side, because yes, I think the expectations are there. So whether, people who track markets a little more closely and use technical analysis, etc., for them, volatility helps them earn that extra return. I think for them they can play around, but I think for other long-term investors, I don't think it's a good idea to do anything before the budget. But after the budget, I think you may get longer-term triggers for you to take certain decisions.
Okay, all right. So no point of doing anything before the budget. Maybe you can rejig your portfolio, give everything a relook after the budget. There may be some changes in, Section 80C as well, like we just discussed before this break with Mr. Homi Mistry. He spoke about how, maybe the limit may be enhanced among other things. So then you may consider, okay, maybe you should put in a little more money in the ELSS scheme. So accordingly, take your decisions. We on The Money Show will, of course, be here with you to guide you through the entire process. We'll take a very short break, but Mr. Rego will still be with us because he'll be answering any questions or queries you may be having. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching The Money Show on ET now, and let's kickstart our Ask The Money Show segment. Mr. Anil Rego, of course, is with us to answer any queries you may be having. Let's take on board email queries we have received. First up, we have Nandakumar Nair, who writes into us saying that I'm salaried and have another 6.5 years to retire. He's been investing in SIPs for the last 25 months. His immediate requirement, though, is for his daughter's wedding, which is in the year 2021. Okay, so he's been investing for 2 years, and in the next 1 year he'll have to actually pay for his daughter's wedding. She's currently doing her MBA from Pune. She'll need funds to construct or buy a house as well. That's in 2024-2025, so I'm assuming he'll want to help her out in that. She has a He has a 3 lakh rupee gold loan and an education loan of 7.5 lakh rupees. He's given his funds, which are as below. There's a tax fund, Aditya Birla Tax Relief Fund of 5,000 rupees, HDFC Mid Cap Fund, again 5,000, SBI Blue Chip and Tata Equity PE Fund, 4,000 in each. Then from the small cap space, the Franklin India Fund, where he's put 4,000, Kotak 50 Fund 5,000, and the Reliance Top 200, which of course is now the Nippon India Top 200 Fund, where he's put 5,000 rupees. So he's got roughly a total loan of 10.5 lakh rupees. 3 lakhs is a gold finance loan, and there's an education loan of 7.5 lakh rupees. Now, unfortunately, time is not on his side, Mr. Rego. So what would you recommend he do?
No, I think the first question is, does it make sense to have the loans going on while you are doing your systematic investments, right? So I think I would go a little conservative there and start off with seeing whether the gold loan can sort of be closed, even if it means redeeming from some of the funds that he already has. So that is one thing that I think should be the first step that he takes to see what are the steps he can take to close his gold loan. And especially if some schemes have done well for him in the recent past, I think those are schemes which maybe he can book some profits, possibly on the larger cap fund side. Some of them have done well. So, those are profit bookings he can do and, reduce his loan. That's the first step. Second is about, then looking at the requirements which are very critical, and they get priority even over possibly return. And his daughter's marriage is again coming, just 2021. So what I would think is he would need to maybe stop one of his systematic investments and possibly move it to a debt fund or a ultra short-term fund. So that may be a better thing to do, and or even an arbitrage fund, because he may want to withdraw money in less than a year, so to optimize on taxes. So coming back to the funds that he has, I think most of the funds he can sort of continue with them. He has some bit of diversification between large cap, mid cap and small cap. So I would think that he can continue with both of them. Maybe what are some of the funds that he can stop, keeping in mind the current situation? We could look at Kotak 50 is a fund that possibly he can stop and start off into something like a ultra short-term fund, or even an arbitrage fund. So the other is possibly also this Franklin India Smaller Companies Fund, keeping in mind his short runway. I think he also has one more need coming up. Possibly, one can look at it also whether he looks at a hybrid funds, or again on the debt fund side. The recommendations I have apart from the equity funds is to bring in some hybrid funds, so that and even a balanced advantage fund, which is a dynamic asset allocation fund, like an ICICI BAF or a Kotak also has their balanced advantage. So one of these funds, he could end up using, and also bring some stability to his portfolio, not just taking too much of a risk at this point of time.
All right. Okay. I hope this has helped you out with your query. Okay, I also just want to take on board our next query from Balkrishna Rao Kadri. He has essentially asked quite a relevant question. Let me just go across to the next question. That's from Balkrishna Rao Kadri. He says, please explain the difference between short-term and low-duration funds. It's quite relevant, because Mr. Raghu, we were just talking about how fixed income funds and debt funds essentially would be impacted because of the budget. So if you could explain to all our viewers and to, Mr. Balkrishna Rao Kadri as well, what exactly is the difference between the two, and also based on what the macroeconomic situation looks like currently, where growth is slowing down, inflation is making a comeback, which one would be moving and how?
Yeah, so the difference between a short-term fund and a low-duration fund is, what is the tenure of bonds that they hold underlying, okay? So if they hold bonds of approximately, say, 1 year to 3 years, then, they are short-term funds. Ones which are, let's say, 6 months to 12 months are sort of low-duration funds. So, and what is the difference and how does it impact? Now, a low-duration fund will basically not get too much impacted if, let's say, interest rates go up. Okay, because there's an inverse correlation. If interest rates go up, you will find that your bond value comes down, and the longer the tenure, your bond value will come down as much to compensate, because a new investor, will get a higher return, so he'll pay you less of a premium so that he gets the same market return from your fund. So what is it that somebody should do at this point of time? I think a little bit of inflation suddenly coming back on the horizon and having a bit of a negative impact. I think globally as well, there's a little bit of beginning to creep in. So I think it makes sense to look a little bit at low duration funds. Short-term funds, maybe for part of it, if you're looking at maybe a 1.5 to 3 year time frame, then short-term funds should be okay. But I think at this point of time, maybe safer to be on low duration funds.
Mr. Rego, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but I would like to get in a word on the risk involved here. See, you could say that a fixed income fund would be relatively have a little lesser risk compared to equity funds, but across the spectrum of different kind of debt funds, where do short and low duration funds essentially stand? How do they distinguish?
Yeah, so typically a low duration fund have lesser interest rate risk, which I was trying to explain, that where the duration is higher, the interest rate risk sort of is lower. Sorry, when the duration is higher, the interest rate risk also is higher. So short-term funds definitely have a higher duration, so they are riskier on the interest rate side. Now, the second risk is the risk of default risk. Let's say if any of the companies that they have invested into default, that typically can be there for both funds. But normally short-term and low duration funds do not take as much of risk on getting into papers which are, or investing in debentures of companies which are more risky. You have the credit risk funds which sort of take more credit calls and invest into more risky papers, and that therefore try and give you a high return. But I think both of these on the default risk side is a lot lower, but definitely short-term funds would have a higher interest rate risk than a low duration fund.
Okay, all right. Thanks so much, Mr. Rego, then, for patiently answering all those questions and queries from our viewers. With that, we'll wrap it up on this edition of The Money Show. Thank you for watching. Enjoy your weekend.